So do you want to just tell us a little bit about you and your music?
Absolutely. So I'm a protest musician based in Glasgow, up here in Scotland. My music's like a weird smattering of alt R&B, Indian classical music, experimental electronic music. I get prog a lot, but I think because a lot of the scales I use from classical music end up in that bent, I end up there as well. So prog gets chucked in too. I cover a lot of themes such as nationalism, disability rights, censorship of minority voices. The really divisive stuff I cover is around the Indian caste system. I did an album about that in 2018. Followed up with an album all about Bollywood that dropped in November of 2022. You can find and read about my music in the likes of Rolling Stone, Vice, Pitchfork, and The Guardian. And I've been really lucky that my music's allowed me to travel around the world, singing these songs, spreading these messages. And I think what I've learned is it's cool to be speaking to, folk who like the idea of your music but might not vibe with it directly. I want to be more community focused this year, which is why I'm like reaching out to folk like yourselves and going, hey, I want to chat to South Asians, folk who are literally going through some of the stuff I'm covering in my tunes. So yeah, covering a bunch of stuff all at once.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really cool what you've got going on. And like you were saying, I think having listened to your music, I think I can empathize with it being quite hard to like sort of categorize you in terms of like where you would put your music because it is very much an amalgamation of different genres to create its
Mm.
own kind of unique sound. But that's kind of what you want to be, really, isn't it? Like you want to be like your like I would listen to your music and think that's very much like your sound rather than he's got an influence from here or here. I mean, it's fine to have influences, but I think definitely you've got something very unique about the music that you put out.
I really appreciate that. My sister reminded me that when I was a lot younger, my dream was to have a sound that was all my own. And I feel like I've come into that having worked really hard on it throughout my career. But it's this double-edged sword where you get this press from whatever magazine saying, oh, it sounds like this and it sounds like that, but it also doesn't sound like anything. But we live in a world dominated by algorithms that like where like an artist's career live and die by being able to sit in a certain box and build a content strategy and have branding all based around like a certain thing. Like, for your listeners, like Lal, the name of my album about Bollywood transit says the color red. I can wear this red jacket and I can have this red box behind me to signify the branding. But it's like it's hard work trying to figure out how best to get your music to people because certain people will hear the music completely differently. But it's exciting as well. Like it's cool to have a sound that's all your own and you're attacking it different ways. Like if I'm trying to attack it from a perspective of how do I get to South Asians, I talk about it a certain way. And in other times that I'm appealing to like maybe an audience who are of other ethnic backgrounds, but like it because it's more experimental, I'd be doing something different. So it's cool to be able to constantly be changing.
For sure, and I think definitely it would be cool to see where your journey takes you next as well.
Mm.
But focusing on the most recent album, like you said, Lal, which means red, and I was gonna ask, why why Lal then? Why have you decided to call this album Red? Because for the listeners out there, like you said, this album is focusing on the Bollywood film industry. So I was interested
Yeah.
as to what is the link there between that and the album title?
It's one of these weird, like, I had the album cover for this record in my head a long time before the songs almost came about. And Lal came about halfway through me working on it. And the short answer is Lal or the color red. It has so many connotations that tie in with the album really well. Like, red is a color that's that like, especially that vibrant shade of red that's across the album cover. It's very synonymous with like Bollywood's like palette when it comes to song and dance numbers that you see. It's very synonymous with like the wedding color that South Asian weddings almost always include. It's synonymous with some of the themes on the album. Like social media is a big thing that I talk about in the album. Like the song 370 that was remixed by Zar from Daytimers. That song's about how different struggles around the world seem to only be taken as seriously as their marketing copy is. Like everyone talked about Ukraine, everyone talked about the Charlie Hebdo shooting in France, and every tragedy is equally demand should equally demand our attention because human rights are human rights, right? But there was a campaign in Kashmir to raise awareness of the atrocities going on there called Go Red for Kashmir, where people would set their profile pictures to a red square, but it just didn't take on the level that the Ukrainian flag and sharing that did. And what I wanted to get across is Lal, or the color red. It was, it was almost what tried to get more awareness of a campaign to talk about a tragedy, but it just didn't land. And I thought, I'll name my album that, and then maybe I can start some conversations about it too. So, you want to pick something, a name for an album that really carries as much of what the album's about in the name, and that's why I chose Red, or Lal, as it were.
Besides the idea of certain tragedies maybe not being given the same level of attention as other ones, and the fact that we should be given the same level of concern for tragedy, whatever scale, wherever it is in the world, what would you say are the other main themes throughout this album?
In contrary to what we've just talked about, it's a very fun, dancey album. And live, I play with a band of 2 drummers, so it's always a big crowd of people dancing a lot to what we're talking about, even if the themes are quite dense. I talk about disability rights on the album, like the song Rupture of the Wheel that you guys kindly played on your show recently. It's about how we consider like nationalism in any country, be it India or otherwise, to be apparently inclusive. You're proud of your country, you could be part of your nationalist movement. But in 2016, a wheelchair user in India was assaulted for not, quote unquote, standing up for the national anthem. And for years, they would play the national anthem before Bollywood films just to drum up a bit of nationalist rhetoric. And I'm sitting there thinking, when a man who can't stand for anything is assaulted for not standing up for his country, what does that say about the age we're in? Like 2016 wasn't that long ago. Do you know what I mean? It's not an entirely negative album as well. There are things I celebrate across the record as well. Like I celebrate the efforts of a queer Indian filmmaker called Sridhar Rangayan on a song called The Pink Mirror, named for his film The Pink Mirror, which tells a queer Indian love story, but the censorship board in India banned it in 2003. And it's got an audience among the South Asian diaspora. He goes to Canada, he goes to Germany, he comes to London. People want to see that film, and streaming's really found it an audience too. So trying to celebrate his efforts as a filmmaker in a really challenging market. Also, there's a song on the record called Hill Station Epithet, which is about these really scenic locations that are in many Bollywood sing-alongs called hill stations. And hill stations are these settlements that are like colonial throwbacks, where they were towns built in really scenic like places in India, but often by settlers who pushed the Indians native to the area out. And I love how Bollywood repurposed these exclusive colonial settlements into iconic parts of Indian pop culture. Like, I don't hate Bollywood films. Like, I grew up watching them just like any other brown person in the UK or otherwise. And like, I loved that Bollywood took something that was quite dark and exclusive and made it this big, vibrant part of what it means to be South Asian. And I love that. So celebrating that as well. And I think that if you're South Asian and you at one point kind of hated being South Asian because you grew up as a racial minority and you almost wished you were white, and the older you got, the more you appreciated it, songs like that are for you as well. So it's a broad album. Like there's stuff where I'm calling out, but there's other times where I'm celebrating things as well. So many a theme across only 10 tracks and half an hour of music.
No, and it's really nice to hear you talking about it in so much depth as well, and to hear how much thought has gone into each individual track. Because I think this is definitely an album, and I think I was thinking this before even speaking to you, that this is an album that I think you probably need to listen to definitely more than once in order to actually properly gauge with the different messages that are being put forward. Because on the one hand, you've got the fact that it's this very unique sound, and trying to take all of that in and appreciate all of that, and on the other hand, you've got all of these different messages which are all extremely valid and important, and put it all together, and it's just this wild creation that, like I say, I think you do need to actually like listen to it a couple of times to actually take it in. So with that in mind, I was gonna ask, is there anything for first time listeners or people that are listening to it for a second or a third time that you would want them to have in their heads whilst they're actually listening to it? Like, just things to consider, sort of thing.
Nah, I think the way I look at it is my music used to be really influenced by like gothy post punk and industrial music, and it was a lot clangier, a lot less inviting, a lot more confrontational. And I'm almost like, you're not going to get people to engage with the cause if you're like attacking them with the way the music sounds almost. But with this new record, it's like really lush sounding synths and stuff, and like sounds you would hear on a Billboard 100 record, albeit arranged in an original way. Like, I think for first time listeners, I'm like, I swear it's a fun, inviting, danceable record. And that like when we play live, like people are like taken in by how the music sounds because it sounds a wee bit different to what they know. But the messaging's almost something that comes later, where I think that in between songs, I'll give people an idea that the tunes are maybe about this and maybe about that. Because you get 5 seconds to say something. If you go on a rant, the crowd stops dancing, the momentum dies down a wee bit. So I think for me, it's like first time listeners, like if you like Blood Orange, if you like Thundercat, if you like the last Solange records, like this could be an album for you. You know, like I would always consider the main influences on this record as like Solange, Thundercat, D'Angelo. Like I fell for like weird R&B, relatively weird R&B in a massive way. Like I love that an album like Voodoo by D'Angelo could sell so many copies despite being so intrinsically weird. Like there's like 7 minute songs, everything's backwards, the drums are doing wacky, and yet everyone's dancing, and it's like a Billboard like number whatever record, and I love that. And I'm thinking I want to make a record like that, and that's what Laal is in my. I mean, you know, it didn't come out on a big major label, and I couldn't tour it with like dancers and stuff like that. I'm looking to tour it in May because I've got a couple of massive shows that I want to build a tour around. But yeah, I almost wanted to take like I was listening to more inviting music, but I wanted to make music that charmed you into getting into it. So I'm like, you know what? If it makes you dance, keep listening to it. And like, if you're intrigued, like, please, like, if you follow me on social media, I talk in more depth about what the songs are about regularly, so you can learn more there as well.
For sure. And when you're talking about it now, it sounds like you're definitely taking into consideration when you're making this music as to what it's going to be like when you perform it live. Like, would you say that's a consideration that you're constantly thinking about when you're composing? Like, you're not just thinking about how it's going to sound to people streaming it at home. You're thinking, what is this going to be like when I'm actually performing it?
It's fascinating, right? Because my wife's South Asian as well, but we grew up in very different ways. Like my wife grew up like with a South Asian community around her and in Glasgow, and not least because like I'm first generation, I'm the first folk from my family ever to grow up like in the UK. So I didn't grow up with big groups of South Asian people growing up. She, on the other hand, did, and this really affected the way we grew up because I grew up in a white majority community, and like I would just kind of consume my music as if I were white. Like I'd go to indie rock gigs. I was really into metal for a long time. The way I think about promoting a record is you get in a smelly van and you go up and down the country until everyone in the country's heard your music. Whereas South Asians, I think, don't consume their music in that way per se. Like I mean, you know, I don't want to stereotype, but at the same time, I've spoken to people and people consume their music very differently in brown circles versus the indie schmindy kind of rock circles that I grew up with. I mean, I don't know if you agree, but it's like if I was to say to like my wife, like, hey, do you want to go see a new band in like in a dive bar downtown, she'd probably be a bit averse to that. Whereas if you go, hey, we're going to go see a gig in a stadium, she'd probably be up for it. And that's, to my eyes and ears, pretty representative. So I grew up always writing music with live in mind. Like for me, like, because I think you can say to anyone, like, what does it mean to be a professional musician? And to many people, it's many different things. Some of them love composing, some of them love touring, they just want to be playing all the time. I definitely fall into the latter category where I used to just play like hundreds of gigs a year. COVID kind of killed that, unfortunately, for a while. I haven't toured properly since 2019, but I've been lucky enough to go to Canada and Sweden last year. I've got some really big gigs coming up this year. And for me, it's like the album sounds really like loads of drum machines, loads of 808s and stuff like that on record. But live, yeah, I'm thinking of it as like, this is a record to dance to. This is a record that, folk are meant to have fun listening to. So yeah, live's always been a big part. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like there is definitely a split in the way people consume music depending on your background?
I think I definitely get what you were saying before when you were saying about depending on what type of music people like and their
Mm.
background as to how they would consume it. I definitely think more of the mainstream brown community, certainly I can definitely imagine them wanting to go to like a stadium or being perfectly happy streaming it
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
going to, yeah, because that whole idea of, I think especially the younger generation now as well, the whole idea of um going down to support your band playing at a bar or a pub or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't know, but I'm not sure as to whether that's maybe dying out a bit just because it's so much more now about if you want widespread success. It's about the guy, like you were saying, kind of hitting that algorithm and being as widespread as possible, which I think you can try to do without selling yourself, selling out your
Yeah.
true, authentic self. But at the same time, it kind of does take away from that sense of um, that authentic growth that I think was associated maybe with bands of like the early noughties, 90s sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be that when rock music was the thing, that touring was this big deal and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, I was lucky enough to play that South Asian festival in London, dialed in, and
Oh yeah.
we played quite early. But it's like there weren't as many live bands or something that day. People were like intrigued that we had two drummers and that like we made this big expansive racket and people were dancing and it was lovely. But it was interesting speaking to people and hearing them go, I can't remember the last time I went to go see a band play. And it made me a wee bit sad, but I also get that fundamentally you can't make people get into a kind of music that they're fundamentally not as fussed by. And it might just be that people consume their music because it came on in the background of a TV show they liked, or they saw a band play on YouTube, but they probably wouldn't go and see them in a gig. But the way I look at it is, if you like me enough to come see me live, that's cool. It doesn't matter what your background is. And where I've really learned is that I have specific content that's going to get me out in brown circles and other content that's going to be more rooted to the kind of people who are specifically into the live show. And it's all equally important to me, but I'm a big fan of just putting my guitar on and getting in front of a group of people. It's a very primal thing for me. Like, I started playing the guitar when I was 12, and when I was 12, I was like, oh, I just want to be on stage all the time playing music. And I'm a simple man. Like, that's still what I want to this day. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So,
On that note, like before we get into talking about the most recent release, the 370 remix,
mm,
just thinking about what you were just saying now about how I'm a simple man, I like just to play my music and talking about the type of performing that you are into, and like you're saying about your upbringing as well, like it's very much like the type of stuff and the way in which you're promoting yourself is probably more associated with rock, which in itself is probably more
yeah,
associated with majority white male people. I think that's fair to say, and the has been that way for a number of years,
yeah.
no matter what its origins are. But would you say that you've ever maybe felt hindered or that people maybe haven't necessarily took you or has been like literally what is this guy doing because of your skin color? Or have you found that people have been quite open and been like, okay, this is actually quite refreshing. We've got this brown guy making music that we really wouldn't have expected.
I think it's this weird double-edged sword where both sides of it are kind of frustrating. Like, rock's really big in India. So when I put the new album, all the streaming figures were, a lot of them were in India. And a lot of folk in India were really like desperate for me to come play in their little village or their little town or something. But I don't have the finances to book a tour there quite yet. I will at some point, but it's like, I think that the way I look at it is, and it's a lesson I've learned over the past year, but you're absolutely right that there's a lot of South Asian aesthetic that I take a lot of influence from. Like, the way I dress is really influenced by the South Asian fashion I've seen in London, and I feel like organically I've really fallen for that. Like I've been to festivals like Dialed In and going, oh, that's cool. I want to buy a bomber jacket and stuff like that. And that really sets me apart from the way people who play rock music or indie music dress now. But with that said, there's definitely been like pushback where I've been playing like trying to make like waves in rock circles and owing to the ethnic origins of my name or the fact that I'm singing about the caste system and like that, people will just think, I kind of don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to bin it. And it's been I've had to be very patient to get to where I am. Like, and that can be summed up in the fact that I had demand for my music in Canada. So I just went, you know what? I don't really need Scotland. And I just went to Toronto, played a gig there, toured across Ontario and Quebec, had an amazing time, and then came back and went, people in Scotland went, oh, this guy has traveled to North America. Maybe we should pay attention to him. And then now I'm doing a lot better in Scotland. But that pushback that you're talking about has 100% happened. But as you say, it's this thing where you can love the idea of being original and being many different things to many different people. But you also have to consider how people consume music. And if I want to reach more South Asians, it's more about existing in that DJ electronic space and making waves in that way. And I've been immeasurably lucky that folk like DJ Collective Daytimers based in London, who really took off over the pandemic and put on festivals and did a lot of community stuff as well, have taken an interest in what I do. They believe in the messaging and what I do. And despite me technically being a rock kind of musician because I'm a guitar player predominantly and like that, they definitely give me a platform for what I do. And that's wonderful because people who might not otherwise like music that was anything to rock are now listening to what I do and really vibing with it. And that's a lovely feeling because there's nothing that beats like someone who vibes with what your song is about telling you that they never realized the music for them existed. And I've been lucky enough to have people say that to me. And that's, I wouldn't trade that for anything. And it's why I do what I do,
Yeah, I can imagine that being like really affirming and being nice that some like a collective that is that well known as well is being like, yeah, we actually dig, we're down with like what you're doing sort of thing. Like, I don't think it's necessary to have like someone give you the thumbs up for your music to be good in a sense, but I'm sure it is like a little bit of like positivity and confidence boosting as well to know that people are actually
I think for me it's stuff like I cover some heavy in my music, and when I get teenagers in India or like people who live the stories I'm trying to tell, because I live in the West and I have all this privilege, I'm just trying to do my bit, and it's like you could be forgiven for assuming that people are just going to be like, I don't want to hear these things from a guy in the West. He has nothing to say about this value. And you'd kind of be right, maybe. But you get people like in India who are half my age telling me that they really believe in what I do. And that's, it eggs you on. And it doesn't matter how much negativity you might get from burner accounts or from people who are actually, the worst thing is when people are just indifferent to what you're saying. Like you're really passionate about a cause and they're thinking, I just couldn't care less. Like I've had people ask me why I would bother about disability rights if I didn't have a disability, when both my parents are disabled, some close friends of mine are wheelchair users. Like it doesn't have to affect me directly for me to care, but there's no point in focusing on people who are going to choose not to engage with it, when the people who do engage with it so much. And thanks again for platforming what I do, mate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. And I think just to reaffirm, like, definitely you don't have to be directly affected by something to champion for it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, props to you for continuing to do that. So obviously mentioned Daytimers briefly before now. So coming on to your most recent release, which is a remix of a track from the album 370 by Zar.
Yeah, his name's Aaron, and like he does a lot of he works with Daytimers. I met him at Dialed In. We kind of geeked out a lot about random guitar. Ironically, a lot of guitar bands that South Asians probably wouldn't normally name drop. And he went, "Oh, you remind me of this band and that band." And he also drums in a rock band as well. Loads of chatting. Back messages back and forth.
When I was reading, I was quite because I read the press release and I was quite shocked because obviously when I think of Daytimers, I think of like DJs in like Boiler Room, and then I read like always a drummer in this punk band type thing,
Yeah,
and I was like, oh,
yeah.
this is like really interesting.
Yeah, and like when they played, I got them a gig in Glasgow, and they came up, and I come from this real DIY punk background where bands come up, you let them stay at your house for free, you cook them a wee meal, stuff like that, real community stuff. And like his band came up and they played a gig in a venue like 20 minutes from here, and they were like, "Oh, you got us a good gig here. What can I do to repay you? We'll get you a bottle of whiskey to say thanks." And I'm like, first of all, I like you as a person. I like the music you make, so I'm opening my arms here to let you have a place to stay. It's all good. Don't worry about it. But we were talking, and we kind of floated the idea of a remix, and I went, maybe you want to do a remix of a tune off the album. Like I love your dance stuff as much as I love your punk and hardcore stuff that you do. And he was like tripping over himself to do it, and it was great. Like the remix sounds, it makes me really nostalgic. Like the breaks vibe, it reminds me of loads of like late 90s stuff that I used to hear my parents play on BBC Asian Network. And it's cool when you'll get this if you make music as well. It's like once you've put a song out, you've heard that song too many times. You're sick of it. You never want to hear that song again. But you hear a remix of a song you've written, you're hearing it in a way you would have never written it because it's a remix. Someone's imagining it, reimagining it in their own image. And yeah, getting the Daytimers treatment is great because they're a really exciting collective. I love what they do, and them giving this their giving it their perspective, it filtering through the lens of all the house, the breaks, the bass, the UK garage and stuff like that. Like these are genres that my wife is getting me into now. She grew up with all that Kiss FM stuff, and because I was an indie rock guy growing up, I didn't experience it. But it's an exciting time. I'm learning all about like music I should have learned about in the 2000s, and it's nice connecting, learning about stuff. So yeah, this remix by Czar from Daytimers.
It must be nice as well to get a different take on it, given the message as well, because obviously 370, it's relating to the article in regards to Kashmir, right? So do you want to just explain for the listeners who may not know, like, exactly what this track is meant to be revolving around in the message?
It's a complicated agreement, Article 370, but essentially it was revoked in August of 2019, and it was to do with Kashmir's special status. That special status essentially being that Kashmir was its own state. It neither belonged to Pakistan or India. And with that gone, basically what's happened is Kashmir's become a hotbed of extremism, and communication lines across Kashmir have been cut and like remained cut for a long time. Like, people, the thing I always point out to people is, do you remember in 2020 when we couldn't go outside? How did you communicate with people that like your loved ones? You used the internet, you used the telephone. That was your entire lifeline for the middle of 2020, I'm assuming, to anyone listening to this. And it doesn't matter how rich or poor or what background you're from. You were gubbed unless you had an internet connection. And yet people in Kashmir didn't have that. And what I'm trying to get across with this song, beyond, hey, why didn't we pay attention to this just because the marketing copy wasn't as good as Ukraine or whatever? But also, Kashmir is this hotbed of extremism, and like minorities who are Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, like all of them are suffering. And rather than taking a humanitarian stance on it, loads of people are kind of politically point scoring. Like there's people saying only the Muslim minorities matter, only the Hindu minorities matter, only the Sikh minorities matter. For me, it's just like, why can't we just have a very blunt extremism is bad? Maybe we should help people out who are suffering. So yeah, the song is a very like, it's a very like anti-war, pro, like, let's just help people out. Human rights are human rights, regardless of marketing copy, regardless of religion. But I think, unfortunately, I'm being a little bit overly optimistic to assume that people will ever take that message seriously without the, their biases when it comes to religion or whatever creeping in. But, it is what it is. It's like, if I can spread a bit more awareness of just the atrocities occurring in Kashmir to minorities suffering there, then I feel like the song has done its job. But Czar was really taken by that, like Aaron, the DJ, and he said, yeah, I really believe in that too. Like, it dovetails with like stuff that he's read about, stuff that he relates to as well. And yeah, he remixed it with that in mind. And you can see it in the press for the remix as well. He talks about that in the press as well. And I think it would have been easy for him to go, yeah, I'll just put some bass lines on this and I'll stick it on. It's fine. Whereas this guy properly took this really seriously. And that to me is really moving, because when you've worked really hard on a song and someone's remixing it, you're giving someone your work, and them taking it really seriously is the best you can ask for, I think.
Definitely, and we're gonna give the listeners a chance to hear that in a second. Just to round things off, the thing that I wanted to ask about, because I was thinking about where you go from here, and then I actually read, so it's actually a trilogy, right? So your first
Yep.
album came out in 2018, A Sacred Boar was number one. Then this is number two, Laal, which again focusing. The first one was more about nationalism. This one's more about Bollywood. Do you know like what direction number three is gonna go in yet, or is that yet to be decided?
It's really funny because it was over Christmas. I sat up one day and I had the idea for what the cover looked like. And I'm really excited because I've known what the concept behind the record is. I can't reveal it just yet, but I know what the concept's been for ages. When I had a trilogy in mind, I had this concept. And I was just thinking, what does it sound like? What's the cover going to look like? And I recently had the cover just kind of materialize in my head. I made a little sketch of it so I wouldn't forget. And now I'm kind of going through that phase where I'm just trying loads of things. I think there's going to be loads of ideas where you're thinking, this is amazing. And you come back to it and it's the worst thing you've ever made. And you're like, in the bin this goes. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it'll be as much of a departure as album one to album two. It'll be a more refined version of album two, because a thing that a lot of people said is, I love the live show. I wish the album sounded more like it. And the way I'm thinking about it is, my wife, my two drummers, my live band are so good. It's like, I want this album to be a reflection of their talent. So it's going to be more live sounding for sure. It'll be more, I think it'll be even groovier than this album, actually. It'll have some surprises on it for sure. When Rupture of the Wheel had a rap in it that was in the language that was English, so many people were thrown by that, but in a way that made them really like excited to see what I do next. I was really chuffed working with like Durante Group, this kind of Pakistani rap collective for underground heroes over there. So more collaborations of rappers for sure, more of a live vibe. But yeah, that'll hopefully be out next year. I don't want to make it happen in 4 years again. That was too long away. The pandemic really slowed it down too. So God knows what the world's going to be like by this time next year, but I'm just going to work on it, get it out there, tour it. So thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it.
Nah, no worries. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been really nice, like properly delving into this and getting like the artist's insight into this body of work. So for people that want to listen to your music, get more of a breakdown of tracks, that sort of thing, where's the best place for them to find you?
You'll be able to find me at my full name. That's my handle on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, and Facebook. Those are the main platforms that I use. You can stream my music on Deezer, Spotify, Apple Music, like Amazon Music, and YouTube. But like the main places to catch me are definitely TikTok and Instagram and Spotify at the moment. So if you enjoy what you heard, shoot us a wee follow. That'd be much appreciated. And if you're based in Manchester, I'll definitely be touring there when for the album tour that's happening. And it's going to be in May of this year as well. So the album will have been out a wee while, get to know the tunes a wee bit, and hopefully see you all down the front. Thanks so much.